Hello and welcome back to Bible Time. This is a Monday edition. And before we actually get into the scripture that we're going to look at today, I just want to remind you of our Believers Fellowship Digital Missions Conference that we're having this year. Obviously, we can't have the normal banquet that we would have, so we're done it a little differently this year. And starting tomorrow night, Tuesday night, and each night, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there will be a short missions webinar where each night you get to hear from some of our missionaries. And that's going to be a great blessing to you to see them and to hear from them. If you haven't signed up for that yet, you need to go to our church webpage and go ahead and do that. Get the information so that you can tune in each night. It'd be a great way for you and your family to sit down and be encouraged each night as you hear from our missionaries. So I would encourage you to do that. And today we're going to be completing our study of 1 Samuel in our Bible time as we're going along with the Believers Fellowship daily Bible reading. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 29 through 31. And these are interesting chapters. As you know, in chapter 29, the Philistines are lining up to do battle against Israel, and David, who has become good friends with the king, is prepared to go into battle, or at least he appears so. But the other generals of the army are saying, what is the deal? We can't have David and his men fighting here. I mean, don't you remember that hit song, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s? And by the way, that 10,000 was us Philistines. And there's no way he's going to go into this battle and not turn on us like has happened before. Back in we read about that in chapter 14. And so finally Achish has to say to David, I'm sorry, but you can't go with us. And this is all set up by David's lies, by the way, lying to Achish about what he's doing, telling him that he's doing battle against cities of Judah when actually he's fighting enemies of Israel. And he lies again, I think, that when he says, well, what have I done? I mean, this is all part of the act. And so he gets sent back home. And when they get back home, you know the story. The city's been burned. All the women and children have been taken by the Amalekites. David goes after them and recovers everything, brings them all back safely. And then in chapter 31, we're told about the battle between the Philistines and Israel and the death of Saul and Jonathan. And so that's kind of this is the ending of the reign of Saul, and there's going to be a big turning point starting with 2 Samuel. But I just want you to think about some things here. You've read the chapters, you know the story. I just want you to think about how the Lord providentially protected David through this whole thing. He providentially prevented David from fighting against Israel by having the generals say, hey, David can't go with us. He keeps the women and children alive. I mean, the city's destroyed, but the Amalekites take the women and children. He providentially keeps an Egyptian servant alive who had gotten sick, and so his master just left him to die. David finds him, revives him, and he's able to lead them to where the Amalekites are, and they recovered everything. It says in verse 18, chapter 30, verse 18, just like the Lord had told them in verse 8, had told David, you'll go and rescue them. And so God is providentially working, and David recognizes that in the end. Verse 23, he acknowledges that the victory was due to the Lord. And David is very gracious to the men who were too tired to go fight. He's very gracious towards some of the leaders of the cities in Judah that have been helpful to him in the issues with Saul. And so you see God's providence there. And even in David, the way Saul died. I mean, back in chapter 26, when David could have killed him, he said, no, he's the Lord's anointed. The Lord will take care of him. Maybe he'll die in battle. Now, that's how the Lord's going to do it. And that's exactly what the Lord did. David wasn't involved in Saul's death in any way. And for Saul, it was a very sad ending. His suicide, taking his own life, was his ultimate act of faithlessness. Rather than trusting the Lord and fighting on, he commits suicide. But I want you to notice how gracious the Lord was to David. He's not obligated to remove us from the situations that we create by our sin. A lot of these situations that David faces here with the Philistine army and Ziklag and all of that, God had graciously and providentially protected him, but God is not obligated to do that. We can't presume upon the Lord that we can be deceitful and lie and the Lord's going to bail us out. We can't do that. In fact, later, David's going to reap the consequences of his deception and lying, because he's going to become king and he's going to have staff members and family members who are going to deceive him and lie to him. So it's all going to come back around to David. But the thing I want to point out the most is that when they get back to Ziklag, you got to remember that these guys that David has with him, we were told back in chapter 22, verse 2, when he started rounding up this group of guys, that they were the dispirited, they were the ones in debt, and they were discontent. These aren't the highest quality guys you can find. They might have been turned into mighty warriors, but they weren't the highest quality guys. And when they come back to Ziklag and they see what's happened, after they're all done crying, they blame David for what has happened, and they're ready to stone him to death. These were not good guys. It says in chapter 30, verse 22, that they were wicked and worthless fellows. That's the kind of guys that David had in his army there. But what did David do when everybody was against him, and especially these kinds of guys were against him? What does it say that he did? Well, in chapter 30, verse 6, it said David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, which each were his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. He strengthened himself. Earlier we read about Jonathan coming and strengthening him, encouraging him. But David, sometimes you have to be able to do that on your own. There's nobody else around to support you. David found his strength in the Lord. And that's an important lesson for you and me to learn, because there might be times when we're basically on our own. Nobody else around us is standing for the Lord. Nobody else is supporting us. We need to find our strength in the Lord, and we need to have a strong enough and a vibrant enough and a growing enough of a relationship with the Lord that even in the most difficult circumstances, we can turn to him and find strength. And an interesting thing, right after that, verse 7 says that David inquired of the Lord. He inquired of the Lord. Last time he did that was way back in chapter 23. So that's a part of him strengthening himself in the Lord. He turns to the Lord. He inquires of the Lord, and he gets direction from the Lord and strength from the Lord in doing this. So that's a big takeaway. God is providential, gracious, but we can't presume on him, and we need to learn what it means to find our strength in him in the difficult situations of life. Great lessons to learn as we see how the Lord is paving the way now for David to be king, and all of his purposes and plans for David are going to be falling into place. We're going to see that tomorrow when we start 2 Samuel. So we'll see you tomorrow for more Bible time.